What was Mariah W. Stewart's impact on slavery and women's rights? To better understand this question, we need to know who Mariah W. Stewart was. Simply put, Mariah W. Stewart was the first American-born woman, black or white, to lecture on politics in public. She took strong stances on the abolition of slavery and women's rights, and argued them with political and religious views. She was both an inspiration and an embarrassment, depending on who was asked. In 1803, in Hartford, Connecticut, Mariah Miller was born. 5 years after, her parents died, and she was left as a servant for a minister's family. When Mariah turned 15, she began to attend Sabbath schools, and continued with this type of education until the age of 20. 3 years later, when Mariah was 23, she married James W. Stewart. The publishing of David Walker's Appeal for the Democracy of Colored Citizens in the United States on September 18, 1829, swept Mariah up in a flurry of activist action. James Stewart, said to have been friends with Walker, spread and delivered the appeal throughout the South. Sadly, James died very soon after the appeal was published, sometime in the remaining months of the year 1829. David Walker's appeal was a huge inspiration for Mariah. Also, due to Mariah's husband's and the Walkers living in the same house on Brattle Street before the Stewarts moved in, it is reckoned that Mariah and David met. After David Walker died, Mariah underwent a religious conversion. She became convinced that she was being called on by God to become a warrior for God and for freedom, and for the cause of oppressed Africa. This conversion set her off on a journey of public lectures, writings, and teachings. Mariah's essay, Religion and the Pure Principles of Reality, was her first. It was published in a popular abolitionist newspaper called The Liberator. The Liberator's founder and publisher, William Lloyd Garrison, had sent out a request for articles written by black women through the ladies' department of The Liberator. Mariah responded to the call by presenting a manuscript to Garrison in 1831. By October of that same year, her essay was advertised in The Liberator as a tract addressed to the people of color by Mrs. Mariah W. Stewart, a respectable colored lady of the city. Her production was considered most praiseworthy and could be bought for 6 cents. All of Mariah's essays, poems, and other writings were published in The Liberator from then on, albeit in the ladies' department. Even the transcripts of her public lectures were published in The Liberator, of which she gave 4. The first lecture was given to an audience of black women at the African American Female Intelligence Society, but it was her second lecture that was the most controversial. It was given in Franklin Hall in Boston, on September 21st, 1832, to an audience of black women and men of the New England Anti-Slavery Society. This was huge because it was the first time ever that an African-American woman had given a political lecture to an audience of both genders. It was also a bit of an outrage because at the time, public political speaking was strictly a man's game. Both men and women were outraged at Stewart's obvious disregard for the current political gender boundaries. But Mariah persevered, regardless of the criticism she received, and gave a third speech, African Rights and Liberty, on February 27, 1833, at the African Masonic Hall. Mariah eventually realized that her lectures weren't motivating people the way she had hoped they would. She gave one last speech, the farewell address, on September 21, 1833. It voiced her concern at her lectures not having the desired effect, as well as acknowledging the upset they had caused. At this point, even if she had wanted to deliver more lectures, the doors of Boston had closed on her, and she would have been hard-pressed to find an audience willing to listen to what she had to say. But even when she stopped giving lectures, Mariah's writings carried on her firm beliefs of women's rights and oppositions to slavery. With her ideas in a more relatable, accessible, and less shocking context, many people found themselves beginning to see the light of Mariah's teachings. Women, both black and white, were finally inspired to speak up against slavery. When she was 75, in 1878, Mariah realized she was eligible to receive a widow's pension of $8 a month, since her late husband had fought in the War of 1812. A year later, in 1879, she used the pension to republish Meditations from the pen of Mrs. Mariah W. Stewart, one of her previous pamphlets. She died a few days afterwards. Overall, at the time she was most active, Mariah wasn't looked fondly upon. Yet she had still made herself a role model in pushing boundaries and standing up for what you believe in. While she was still alive, her writings had succeeded where her lectures hadn't. capturing positive attention from people who would be inspired themselves to become activists and speakers on the same issues. Mariah W. Stewart achieved a great many things in her lifetime, and she was an influence on women and men for years to come.